I want to go back to something you said earlier, and that was about bringing up morality when you're talking about street activism, when you're talking to people during street activism. What are your opinions on that?
What's up? Natalie here with my buddy Justin of Debug Your Brain, and we're going to be doing a little interview where we talk about activism and things like that. So he runs a great channel, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your channel?
My channel is primarily about veganism. I do a lot of videos that are kind of about sort of debunking anti-vegan arguments and things like that, but then I also have just sort of started to break into street activism and things like that. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and he has a really good emphasis on like psychology and what makes people psychologically not want to go vegan and kind of how to get through those barriers. So we'll be talking about that a little bit. Do you think there's like a moral obligation to do like activism?
I was like literally just writing a video about this. So I think Lifting Vegan Logic recently put out a video about whether or not there was a sort of moral obligation to do activism. And I can't remember what he said now, so, you know.
He said no.
I know he said no. I know he said no. I don't remember the specifics of his argument now, but I check out my my video on that. It's coming up soon. But I tend to, I think like, I look at things on a spectrum, right? So it's like at some point it hits morally virtuous, and then there's space before it hits moral obligation. You know what I mean? And there's things like something like, if I saved one person's life, that would be morally virtuous. If I saved 10, that's more morally virtuous. You know what I mean? So that's why I kind of look at it, there's like a spectrum going there. And so I think where I currently stand is that I think doing activism is like as far on that virtuous before you get to obligation as you can possibly be. Okay. And I describe it kind of like, once something's a moral obligation, I think you're justified in using shame. Okay. Not necessarily that you pragmatically should, as far as an effective thing, but I think you're justified in shaming someone. Yeah. Whereas before it gets to be a moral obligation, I don't think you're justified in using shame. And so what I would say is that I think we should very strongly encourage people to be activists, especially, like, particularly, well, obviously, if they're vegan already. One of my patrons sent me something recently that was really good, and he was talking about how social networks have these properties that end up being more predictive of change than individuals. And
like Facebook has it?
No, sorry. Sorry. No, like as in, like, if there's 10 people in a room, there's a social network there. There's social effects that are occurring. And that kind of, got me thinking about that. One of the things they said is like, I believe it's Israel, right? So most of the world has about 1 to 3% vegans or something, and Israel I think has like 15% or something like that. Yeah. And one of the things is that they have a strong, like, dense pockets of activists. Okay. I believe is what I was saying. Fact check me on all this, but like, But so if we're kind of treading water and just kind of preheating the oven with people who are just being vegan, and activism is what actually like lights the match. Then I don't know. Am I comfortable calling it a moral obligation to go activist? I don't know, but certainly I think we should definitely encourage people who are already vegan to do some kind of activism. And that doesn't mean going out on the street is hard. That doesn't mean going out on the street.
I don't think it's very hard.
No. So I don't either. I think I like it, but I think for most, like, I think for a lot of people it might be.
Yeah, and it also depends where you live. Like, I am very lucky where I live, 2.5 miles away from one of the busiest places anywhere. It's easy for me to get to. Like, if you're in like a rural place, like, where are you going to do street outreach? Right. So I feel like I have a pretty big issue with the term moral obligation. Like, to me, it just sounds like something I don't want a part of. I'm like, oh, you're obligated. Like, I feel like a lot of Americans, and myself included, even the word moral is like a bit of a trigger word. Like, sometimes when I'm talking to people, if I mention morality, it's like I can see them like kind of shutting down. And like I have to use a different word. Like, someone told me that they would never be a moral vegan, but they would be an ethical vegan. And I was just like, those are the same thing. But like, there's kind of this connotation to that word that like makes people a bit wary. So I would say it's probably not a moral obligation, but also everyone should do it.
I know, that's how I feel too. I'm like an obligation just feels like it feels a little too harsh to me or something. Yeah. That is funny. But like, get on your shit. Yeah. Like, I think especially though, like, if we really expand the definition of activist, right? Like, if what we mean is like making a couple social media posts a week, like, I do think most people who are vegans can probably do that.
Yeah,
you know,
I think they can do that.
Like as you say, like there's different geographic factors that are going to limit people from doing certain things.
Yeah,
But
and like social factors.
right.
And,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but there's just so many different types, like that shock activism.
Yeah.
Like I've seen people do that and just thought like, there's no way that works, but like apparently
I
it
know.
does. So like, cool, go for it. Just get some shock. Even talking to your friends or giving your friends good vegan food, like that's great. And whenever like, if I'm on the street and I meet someone and they're like, oh, I'll talk to you about veganism, I've got a lot of vegan friends. That conversation is so much easier than someone who doesn't have vegan friends. Like this one that I just put up, it's called like the easiest street interview I've ever done. This guy just like agrees with pretty much everything I say. It turns out his sister's a vegan who like runs a sanctuary. So like, of course he was more primed to be interested in it. So yeah, if people know vegans, that in itself is kind of a form of activism. But yeah, really just, it's a dire situation. It's getting worse by the day. We really need to turn this around. And yeah, I really think everyone should be active.
And yeah, and I think what you said there is right, because like not everyone can do every type of activism, you know, and I'm even like, I'm not saying you have to go out and do street activism or like talk to people or buy a camera or phone or whatever, but like, you know, you can make a couple social media posts or something like that. You know what I mean? It can be pretty light, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Like even one of the big reasons I went vegan was that my friend shared a little infographic about pandemics in animal agriculture, and that was enough to like set me down this path.
Yeah.
So even something really small like that can have a bigger effect than you think.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, and that was about bringing up morality when you're talking about street activism, when you're talking to people during street activism. What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, so I feel like that's another thing that really kind of depends who you're talking to. When I first went out to do street activism, I basically just stole Humane Hancock's sign, which is like, can you morally justify not being vegan? And I went out there and all I got was like a lot of dirty looks, people saying mean shit to me, and like people coming up and just being assholes. And I could tell that like people really didn't like that sign. I was like, why is that? Is it just the word moral? And then as I've kind of done more activism, like I noticed that there are certain types of people who that is just a really big trigger word for. And honestly, I feel like I was one of those people before. I was like, oh, morality, whatever, screw you. So yeah, I think it is good to avoid, except when you're talking to someone who you can tell they're interested in philosophy and they like ideas, then I think it's good to bring up. And I do like, there are certain questions where I find it a really useful word. Like, is there a moral difference between a dog versus a pig? Like for some reason that doesn't quite trigger that aversion to morality that it can use in other contexts. But yeah, you said you avoid it like the plague.
I do. Yeah, I try as hard as I can to not say the word moral or the word ethical.
Really?
Yeah. I think.
Have you had like bad experiences with saying them, or?
I think it turns on a certain module in people's minds that I don't actually want turned on. And one of the things is like one of the most common phrases that's become like a meme in our society is morality is subjective.
Oh yeah.
And
I used to say that.
Yeah. Well, morality is subjective. It's like, and it's like something that like sort of like learned people just like take for granted. Like, oh, well, you know, morality is subjective. Morality is subjective. But like the thing is that almost, first off, like I'm not talking about philosophers who study this, like moral subjectivism. Like there are arguments for moral subjectivism. Like that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the person who like has never studied moral philosophy in their life, saying morality is subjective.
That was me.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Like this is used as like a conversation ender, as like a conversation stopper, not like something to expand our knowledge. There's actually a book that I'm reading, and the guy describes it. He talks about ideas as a sort of like cognitive immune system, and he said the phrase morality is subjective is an immune disruptor. Like he says it's like it's so commonly used that it's meant to stop things rather than expand them. And so I want that phrase to never come up. And so what I tend to say things like, you know, do you think it's good that we put pigs in gas chambers? Like, is that a good thing? Do you?
Is it the right thing?
Yeah. Is it the right thing? Is it good? Yeah. I don't say, is it the moral thing? Because as soon as people hear moral, they're like, oh, morality is subjective. It's like, I feel like they have an escape hatch. And you only need about 25% of people that are really behind a cause and speaking up for it before you can actually get social change. So like, I think something that's kind of intuitive to people is they either think like, oh, well, to change a law, 90 to 100% of people need to be vegan. Or maybe they even think just over like 60%, just enough to pass the law, but that's not the case. Yeah, you only need about 25% of people to really like start affecting social change.
It sounds like so many though. I mean, we're at like 3% right now.
Yeah, that's not too bad though. That's not too bad.
So? Yeah, okay, yeah, that's another thing I wanted to ask you. You said you're optimistic that you'll live to see like a vegan world or the end of animal farming or something?
I'm optimistic that I will see currently what you might describe as like rich Western countries abolish farming practices.
Really? So what makes you so optimistic?
So I think a lot of times social change happens very quickly. So it happens in a non-linear way. It creates like this exponential thing. Yeah. And so like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the lily pad problem. It's like
where they like multiply in a pond or something.
Yeah. It's like you have these lily pads and they double every day, and it's sort of like okay, how many days they double every day for like 20 days or something, and it's like how many days will it be before half the pond is covered in lily pads? And people make their guesses and they're always wrong. It's day 19 is the answer. 19 out of 20, because if it doubles every day, if it's half there, then the next day it's the whole. And it's this sort of bias we have. We're really bad about thinking of things exponentially. We think of things linearly. And so when you consult yourself and you say, I wonder how long it's going to be, you tend to think in linear terms. Yeah. But so what I'm trying to bootstrap this and recalibrate, because in my head, I don't think it's going to be 30 years. But I'm thinking linearly. So let me adjust for that. You know what I mean? And so I think because of that, there's going to be something that is kind of disconcerting to me about street activism is that I have no idea if it worked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think that Humane Hancock, I noticed, has started like collecting signatures of people to email them.
He says he's like, I'm going to follow up with you or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about doing that, or do you have any thoughts on,
I think I should. I haven't yet. I think that it's probably a good idea. The thing about it is like there is some evidence of it working that I've seen personally. Like when I first went vegan, I spent a lot of time on the vegan subreddit, and someone had like commented, oh, I talked to this guy with red hair in London once and he totally changed my mind about everything and now I've been vegan ever since. And someone was like, oh, is it this guy? And it was Humane Hancock. So like that was kind of the first month of going vegan. I saw that evidence, and then I thought about how Earthling Ed was the reason I went vegan. And yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of like a shot in the dark. Like you really have no way of knowing, but it's still valuable, I think, to do. I've definitely had people message me like when I was doing a lot of Cube of Truths in Boston, this girl messaged me. She was like, hey, like, I'm still thinking about that conversation we had. I haven't gone vegan yet, but like, I really want to. So it definitely helps. But yeah, I think that there are more effective forms of activism for sure.
In psychology, there's this thing called the sleeper effect, which is like, one thing I do is I don't judge it like, oh, did I convince this person right now?
Yeah.
The question is, as long as I planted a seed or sort of, paved the way for that idea to sort of germinate in their mind, then I think I did something good. And I think that's sort of the same thing with me, talking about when I read Practical Ethics, and then when I saw that sidewalk chalk, like the thing that like made me go vegan was watching that Earthling Ed, we're watching Earthling Ed videos, but how much groundwork was laid by those things? Like how much more ready was I to hear that message because I had heard those things previously?
Yeah. Like, do you know the 100-point scale that people talk about? Yeah. So it's like basically getting someone vegan is like to 100, like from 0 to 100. So yeah, the chalk could have been like 10 points or whatever, and the book maybe 10, and then Earthling Ed like 40, I don't know. Yeah. And then I think the other thing that we need to remember is that people can start from negatives. Like a lot of people I talk to are probably like negative 50 veganism. I'm sure that I was like negative 30 because I just didn't like vegans. I didn't like vegetarians. So like when I'm talking to someone like that, my only goal is to like just give them a positive view of vegans because you gotta start somewhere, So
yeah, I think that's a good point. I've actually been thinking about doing a video about this, but I want to get kind of more reps under my belt before I do. But thinking about it, kind of sort of categorizing people about where they are. It's like, almost about to go vegan, like neutral to it, anti-vegan. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like they kind of like 4 levels, and then being like, okay, where do I think this person's at? And then I'm going to talk to them. I kind of have a different strategy that kind of like we were talking about earlier, kind of adapting on the fly. Like what are this person's values? Where are they at? And I feel like that's like, to me, that's sort of like the leveling up of the street outreach, is being able to sort of
see where they are on that journey.
Right.
Yeah.
Finding that and being able to identify it and then to execute on the proper strategy for that.
It's hard because like I feel like if I meet someone who's like really anti-vegan, like I don't really know what to do from there, besides just like maybe leave. And then I think back to myself, like, what could I have said to myself 10 years ago? Nothing. Yeah, I know there's always debates about like, oh, should we eat like the Beyond chicken at KFC? Like that just came out. And I feel like I'm firmly on the side that we should.
Interesting. So this is actually a question I was going to ask you. I wanted to ask you specifically about that, just because it's like a hot topic right now. So you think we should? Give me the case for it.
The case for it. The case for it is we are not up against people who are good, moral people. We're talking to humans. Like humans are not the best creatures. Like I think that we all know that. So expecting people to do the morally right thing, like it clearly hasn't worked. Like you just have to look around where we are now and see that it hasn't worked. So providing these options, I don't know if that's going to work, but to me, it signals like a step in the right direction. Like, yeah, it sucks to be giving money to KFC. And like, if you don't want to, then don't do it. But for someone who kind of is interested in going vegan and is like, really doesn't have much time, it doesn't excuse their behavior eating meat, but it is making it easier for them to make that choice if they want. And I think that's valuable. Like one of my friends, he is interested in veganism, but he's not going to do it. He just won't for whatever reason, whatever stupid reason he has. Hitler was a vegetarian was the last thing he said to me. But even he eats Impossible Whoppers like twice a week because it's like a great option for him. So, I do hate Reducetarians, but I think it's a step in the right direction. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. So the debate I've heard is more around like, I guess, are they vegan is the first question.
Right.
Because they're cooked, I guess, in the fat, or like the employees will say that it's not cooked in a vegan way or something like that. Or
they're just cooked. They're cooked in the same place as the chicken, but they're not cooked in animal fat, from my understanding. I could be wrong.
See, this is part of the problem, is because I just hear different things. Right, like, you know what I mean? So it depends on where you, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't tried them.
Yeah. I haven't either. I guess where I stand with it is kind of like, it's in the same way that you are, like, I think it's good that they're there.
Yeah.
And I think the more barriers we pull down, the better. And I think it's sort of a double-edged sword. Maybe it's not a double-edged sword. I don't know what the phrase I'm looking for is. But it's like, not only are there more options, but when someone like us confronts someone and they're like, I could never do it. And you're like, really? There's like a ton of burger options. Yeah. KFC has it. Or, you know what I mean? Like it actually gives us more sort of... more rhetorical power, actually.
Absolutely.
So that's something I'm definitely cognizant of. I think the thing that I've been seeing that I don't know that I really agree with is that like people will be like, oh, like as a vegan, you should go there and purchase the chicken nuggets.
I wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah.
Like I don't think there's
like an imperative for
like if you don't want to, then don't.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of like, I mean, if I'm going to spend my money somewhere, I would rather spend it at a vegan establishment in my hometown, because the vegan establishment might go out of business at some point, but KFC ain't going out of business.
No,
you
it's going to be fine.
So,
I mean, we can hope. We can hope. Sometimes we need technological help to make a change. Like in the case of whaling, right? Like they were using whale oil to light lamps for years, and then kerosene came out, and then they were like, whaling is barbaric, let's stop. They wouldn't have changed if they hadn't had another option. So we need options for people. Unfortunately.
There's a philosopher who said something like a modern philosopher, and he talks about, he said once lab grown meat is like same cost as normal meat, everyone will start eating it, and then they'll all say eating meat was wrong all along.
Yeah. Charlie and Ben talk about that all the time. I'm like, oh my God, they're right.
Yeah.
It's like once something is no longer I mean, it's already not necessary, but once it's really not necessary, like everyone who does that is barbaric.
Yeah. There's a difference between like if you're having like a super long debate with someone, or even maybe arguing with someone online, like in like an extended forum, and like what you need to do in activism when you have only 5 minutes to talk to someone. It's like you need to like condense the concepts in a way. And does that ever, like, I guess, how do you feel about it? Does that ever bother you? Do you ever feel like you're making them too simplistic, that you're not like delivering the nuance that they maybe deserve in some instances or anything like that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like, there are a lot of things I wish I had more time to say. Like sometimes I go out with like some of my friends and they'll kind of do street activism. And like I was with one of my friends and this guy was like, oh, humans are omnivores. And she started talking about how like we may not be omnivores and like all these reasons that we're probably more herbivores. And she talked about it for like 5 minutes and then he was arguing about it. It was whatever. It's like you need to cut that and just say, just because we can do something, does that mean we should? So like I think it's, I'm really concerned with what's effective more than like what's like nuanced. If someone does have more questions about the nuances of it, like they could come to me afterward, they could look it up online. But yeah, in those few minutes, I'm just trying to get them as close to, you know, agreeing with animal rights as I can. So yeah, that's the plants feel pain. Like I know plants don't feel pain. I know that I could go into the science of it, but I don't. I just say we kill more plants with animal agriculture. Like I feel like that just works better, even though I'm essentially lying because like I know that plants don't feel pain. I say like, oh, maybe they do. So yeah, it is kind of like, it feels kind of weird sometimes. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. I call that like the even if statement. The like, even if they feel pain, it still doesn't like, and I think that's
no, you're right.
Yeah. That's like the perfect way whenever you have certain arguments, if you can defeat the argument even on their own terms, never go down that like alley of like something like that. Just defeat it on their own terms and then move on. Yeah,
I kind of feel that with like, even if one person can't make a difference. I mean, there's pretty clear evidence that you can, but even if you can't, does that mean you should pay to torture an animal? Even if you can't make a difference, it's still the morally right thing to do to not pay to torture that animal. So like, I think that's a good way to look at things.
Yeah, for sure. That reminds me of something else I ran into, which is like, I've been tricked before, and like they're not trying to trick me, but I notice what people will do is like, I'll be like, so why, wouldn't you go vegan, or like, what's stopping you, or just asking about it. And they'll be like, I think the strategy we should use is get people to go 10%, or I think the strategy we should use is XYZ. And it's like, okay, but I didn't ask you what strategy we should use. I asked you why you aren't going vegan. And I've gotten distracted by that before just because I like the intellectual question of like the 20% or whatever it is.
The Reducetarian argument?
Yeah, like I like to I almost get trapped sometimes because I want to like have the intellectual discussion about something. Yeah. And I sometimes will forget to just like, no, just bring it back. Like ask like, why are you? We're not having like this discussion about what we should do with society. I'm asking like, why are you not vegan?
Well, what is your argument to that?
To which one?
Reducetarianism.
Yeah, I guess, I actually think the sort of snappy arguments are honestly pretty good.
Like there's still an individual who's being affected.
Yeah. I mean, you're still hurting a ton of people, or a ton of, what was I saying? Yeah, you're still hurting a ton of individuals, but it's like the same thing if you kicked a dog 7 days a week, and I told you, I think that's actually a pretty good response. I think it encapsulates the whole thing pretty well.
One thing that I like that Soytheist was making a video about was if you look at the calories consumed globally now, it's already that 83% come from plants. So you could make the argument that the world is already 83% vegan if you're just looking at the Reducetarian model. So it doesn't.
That's a cute
argument. It doesn't make sense, when you just look at the numbers, like something's not adding up. And even if everyone in the world decreased their animal consumption by, 50% or whatever, we kill around 80 billion animals a year. Do we still want to kill 40 billion?
Yeah.
Like that's still way too many animals to be killing. So I really think that it's just not a good argument, like at the end of the day. Do you have any book recommendations?
Oh, Jesus.
Because it sounds like you read a lot. Like any for like activists or vegans who want to kind of work on or learn more about psychology, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for psychology, I would definitely recommend You Are Not So Smart by David McRaney. It's a really awesome introduction into cognitive biases and logical fallacies. And he was originally a journalist, and then I think did his master's work in psychology or something. And so he's got a little bit of both worlds. He's just like really down to earth, writes really well to the layperson, and it's just like a really fantastic book.
I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, all of his books are great, so I highly recommend any of those. And then I also would definitely recommend Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind, I believe.
Okay.
And he talks about the psychology behind morality, and it's pretty illuminating, especially for the topic that we're discussing. So
nice. Thank you so much for watching today. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and head on over to Justin's channel for the rest of the conversation, where we talk about how we got into veganism and activism, how to reach someone who has different values from you, and a whole lot more. I'll see you in the next video.